And now, I leave the floor for Mr. Datuk Kristan, Director, Performance Management and Delivery Unit of Malaysia. He'll talk about how does Malaysia plan to deliver its top 200 national projects to create 2.2 million jobs by 2020. Too much interesting. Thank you.
اوكي طيب مساء الخير جميعا. احنا دلوقتي we'll have a session about PEMANDU. PEMANDU هي ال Performance Management Delivery Unit responsible of delivering the top 200 national projects في ماليزيا. We had lots of meeting مع Mr. Chris و several of the government officials yesterday. ال entity دي has been doing lots of very fantastic things. يعني he will take you through it. One of the key things that I heard from him امبارح قال لك اهم حاجه بالنسبه لنا ان احنا we make sure ان هو يعني ministers are committed. فبنديه we give them targets and KPIs and they are committed. we make them pregnant. Okay? So they are ready to deliver. But I'll keep it with him so you can take them back through the whole things. Okay. Enjoy.
Males can get pregnant as well. Okay. It's kind of okay, so let me quickly start by there's so much white space in the room. I'm not sure how to go about doing this, but let me tell you guys about a bit of the Malaysian story. Start by a little bit of history. So as you guys know, in Egypt, you are now talking about your strategic vision 2030. It was just recently unveiled. In Malaysia, we've had our Vision 2020 since 1991. Okay, so Dr. Mahathir unveiled Vision 2020 almost more than 30 years ago. All right, and if you can look at this chart, I want to show you. In that period, our economic data hardly moved. All right. So what I want to share with you here is that the very act of unveiling, of declaring yourself a vision, and telling yourself you want to transform your country into a developed economy doesn't do anything for you unless you have something else in mind. So in this whole time, this intervening 20 years, everybody was chasing a bunch of different indicators. We were looking at GDP. Our investment agencies thought they were doing a great job of attracting FDI, and so on and so forth. But no one really understood that only the World Bank is the arbiter of deciding whether an economy is middle or low or high income. And the World Bank does not use GDP as its indicator, nor does it use investment. It uses gross national income. We didn't realize this. We didn't make the change in our program until Prime Minister Najib took over in 2009. Now, let me tell you what happened when we changed the focus of our transformation program to look at gross national income. Okay, so the red line over here is the World Bank's threshold for classifications of economies. So a high income economy in 2010 must be an economy that produces $12,276 US per capita in gross national income. Okay, and Malaysia at the time was 8.5, and you can see in these last 5 years we have rapidly started closing the gap. We have finally started to close the gap. So I want to show you guys this because I want to explain to you what happened in 2009. Okay? I also understand from listening to Minister Ashraf and the panel this morning that Egypt was very, very focused on becoming on your competitiveness indicators. I also want to show you, this is Malaysia's competitive position. So in the World Bank Ease of Doing Business, we are 18 out of 189. In the IMD Competitiveness Yearbook, we are now 14 out of 61 countries. In the WEF Global Competitiveness Report, we are actually 18 out of 140 countries. Okay, so we have gone ahead of Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, China, and so on and so forth. Now, this did not happen by accident. All right? Because we looked in 2009 very hard at ourselves and asked ourselves the question, why was the economy not moving for the last 20 years, even though our Prime Minister had unveiled a very grand mission? Okay? So first of all, the conclusion number one was that no one was focused. There was no clear idea what that vision really meant. How was that vision going to be measured? What kind of targets are you going to use, and how do you know whether you're actually on track? So we had declared that we were going to be a developed nation, but this was open to so much interpretation that we would never get there. Okay? Secondly, and this is related to the first point, if leadership is not focused and there is no clarity on the goal, you can hardly expect the implementers to know what to do. And here again, I want to draw your memory back to some of the discussions earlier this morning. I resisted the temptation to respond because I wanted to save my remarks for the hall, but it seems like there's nobody in this hall now. So you are the only ones to share my wisdom. In Malaysia, I take great offense when people blame the civil service for failing to deliver. I am actually greatly offended when people claim that the human capital is not ready in any country. Your countries have been independent for several decades. Your civil service, for good or for bad, has been doing an okay job. Civil servants are trained to do what they are told to do. And when they are given clear instructions on what to do, you can surely expect them to deliver. So any failure of a government to deliver on its promises to the people must therefore be down to the fact that there was no clarity in the instructions to the implementers. If you give clear instructions to the civil servants, they may have gone to school in Harvard, or they may have gone to school down some nondescript university in Yemen. If you give them clear instructions, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, they will carry it out. So all this discussion about human capital and the weaknesses of the civil service, actually we feel in Malaysia this is just an excuse by the leadership of the country for failing to do what it was supposed to do. Okay? Number 3 reason why governments fail to deliver, certainly in Malaysia, is because we launch our programs without adequate engagement with the public. So we end up having arguments with the public in the middle of the program. You have done something, you have started the construction of a highway, for example, and then you find that people are protesting after the work has already started. All right? So very clearly, if you want to get results fast, if you want to get big results fast, you must make sure the public is engaged before you actually do it, or you'll be wasting time in the middle of the process. And number 4 gap is, of course, and this one, I think all of you will understand this one. There's a pure lack of accountability. Okay? So the president makes a declaration, it gets passed on to the prime minister makes several ministers accountable for it, and then the director generals, they say, not my job. It's this guy's job, it's that guy's job. So let's say I was walking around Tahrir Square when I arrived, and I noticed that this place is in serious need of redevelopment. Okay, and I asked Minister Ashraf yesterday, I met with Excellency Ibrahim Mahlab in the morning, and I asked him, engineer, how many ministers is responsible for building a hotel in Cairo? Everyone immediately points to the tourism minister or something like that, but I said the poor guy can't build a hotel because the minister of works hasn't built a road. And the water minister has not connected the water supply, and the electricity minister hasn't connected the electricity, and the education minister hasn't produced enough workers for the hotel to hire, etc., etc., etc. Everyone will point the blame at each other. Because unless the plans are clearly deconstructed into the most minute detail, okay, nothing will move because everybody will wait for everybody else to make the first move. Now, this is clearly, my friends, this is unconventional wisdom. It's very undiplomatic language to use. But in Malaysia, like I told you, we already wasted 20 years of our Vision 2020 runway. So we had to do something really radical. So in Malaysia, we don't talk about things in abstract. We don't debate the vision. It might have been 30 years old. We still stick to it. We focus on implementation only. Okay? So earlier this morning, especially in the manufacturing discussion, I was hearing all sorts of a lot of wisdom. And by the way, I'm a manufacturing veteran. I worked for 20 years in an American multinational producing microchips. So I know exactly the discussion that was taking place. But when I heard that one gentleman speak about the government needs to invest in every sector in Egypt, I said, you gotta be kidding me, right? Because no country has the resources to spread across every sector of the economy. Okay, we have all heard about the Pareto principle. The 80-20 rule applies even in economic development. Okay, I will show you data from our efforts why this is true. Okay, to become a high-income nation in Malaysia, we clearly decided that we needed to focus on two things. We needed to focus on focus, okay? Our economy is quite diverse. In our national statistics, we track almost 50 different industrial sectors. Clearly, not all of them contribute at the equal pace, at the equal rate of the rest of them. Some sectors have greater income generating potential than others, all right? So we needed to narrow down our focus into just a few key areas that would create the necessary catalytic effect, okay, that would then bring the rest of the economy along, okay? And we did this because we know we do not have the resources, neither fiscal resources, nor physical resources, nor human resources to do everything that everyone wants to do, okay? And we needed to focus on competitiveness. Right? Now, so what did we do at first? This is first step in our process. We call our process the Big Fast Results methodology. Right? This methodology comprises of 8 individual process steps. Okay? If you look at each one of these steps, you will find these are things that you are already familiar with. Okay? This is nothing unique to us Malaysians. Every country I've been around the world has shown me their strategic vision statements, okay? You have 2030, Uganda has 2040, Tanzania has 2025, Malaysia has 2020. These are the 4 countries I work in. Okay, every country has a development vision. Okay, now the importance of strategic direction in the development vision is as follows. Every single one of your major projects is a multi-year program, correct? It takes more than a year to build a dam, for example. Certainly takes more than a year to build a highway. But governments operate their national budgets on an annual basis. This presents a very real danger of projects becoming deprioritized once you've already begun. Okay, so in Malaysia, for our National Transformation Program, we compel the Cabinet to declare upfront which are their priority sectors so that our Minister of Finance doesn't have to argue with his colleagues in the future years about where the funding should go. All right? Now, this is very, very important. It's definitely more easily said than done. All right? In Malaysia, it took us 4 months of private weekend retreats between the Prime Minister and the members of his cabinet for them to achieve consensus. Because believe you me, every cabinet minister believes that his portfolio is the most important portfolio in the cabinet. The defense guy thinks he should get all the money, the health guy thinks he should get all the money, the education person thinks he should get all the money. The finance minister is the one that needs to make the decision at the end of the day. All right? And this decision needs to be sustained for the entire period of the program, which means for Egypt, you need a set of priorities that can guide the decision-making in the budget for until 2030. Okay? For as long as your programs are broken down. Okay? Because no project only lasts 1 year. Okay? So, how did we do this from an economic perspective? We took our economic sectors and we applied 3 different sets of filters. First one was to look at GDP contribution. So this one was just to filter for critical mass. We needed to understand which ones of the industrial sectors in the country were actually contributing significant amounts of money to the national economy. Then we applied a second filter to this set, which was to look at the global growth rates for those industries. Because we wanted to make sure that if we're going to focus our resources on an industry, that this is a growing industry. It's not only big in Egypt or big in Malaysia, but we wanted to make sure that this is an industry that is not sunsetting, that is still growing on a global scale. Then finally, we apply a third filter, which is for the share of market. Because you want to make sure that whichever industry you decide to focus on is an industry in which your Egyptian players are competitive. If they are competitive, their market share will be growing. Because once again, there is no point investing your resources in an industry, no matter how big, no matter how it's growing around the world, if your Egyptian share of market is declining. It means your players are not competitive. You better let them just go their own way. All right? So by the end of this process, we had identified for the Economic Transformation Program to focus all our energies on these 12 sectors: oil, gas and energy, palm oil and rubber, financial services, agriculture, telecommunications, healthcare services, business services, tourism, education services, wholesale and retail, electrical and electronics, this is my area, and then the redevelopment of Greater Kuala Lumpur into a world-class capital city. That itself is an economic activity, right? And so let me show you then a piece of data that bears out our choice of the 12. So as we break down our gross national income, you see clearly the Pareto principle playing out here. The dark blue represents the proportion of our country's gross national income contributed by those 12 focus sectors only. And the light blue is what's contributed by the other 30 sectors. Okay, so clearly focusing on the priority sectors is the right way if you want to make your numbers jump quickly, right? Now let's move back to the steps. Well, so once we've set the direction, okay, then what we did next is to get the bureaucrats out of the way. Once leadership has set a priority decision, we actually convened what we call labs, okay? I apologize for the bureaucrats in this room. You have a role to play, but not now, okay? I will explain where you become important in a little while. Now, once leadership has set a priority that they want to develop a certain industrial sector, we engage the private sector to come in. Because in Malaysia, we made a strategic decision many years ago to make the private sector lead investments lead the development of our economy in Malaysia so that we could focus our limited resources on the social sectors. Bearing in mind, okay, money is not infinite, not in any country, all right? So if the private sector can contribute to developing your manufacturing economy, let them do it. Because no private sector is going to contribute to developing your health system. Only the government is going to be able to do it. So where do you spend your money? Okay? So we engaged private sector experts and some experts from academia and some experts from the civil service, God bless them, into a lab when we locked them up in conference rooms for 6 weeks, full time. 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. for 6 to 8 weeks until they provide what we call a detailed 3-feet implementation plan for how that particular objective will be met. Okay? It's too much to describe, but suffice to say that after 6 weeks, you provide this. Now, the reason we make this investment in time and money in Malaysia, you're actually taking people out of their jobs full time, okay, for 6 weeks to do just this intense problem solving, is because we want to get away from the traditional way of governments trying to solve problems, which is by convening meetings. What happens when you try to solve problems using meetings? People convene task forces or whatever. The task force meets for a few hours and then they break off. And then everybody tries to see, okay, when can we meet again? They meet 2 weeks later, and then the guy from this ministry is absent because he's gone on leave or he's taken a course. The guy from the other ministry has now been transferred to another ministry. The guy from the third ministry has sent his subordinate to represent him because he's in a meeting with the minister, etc., etc., etc. Then, of course, the subordinate guy says, I cannot make a decision because I'm not the boss. Nothing happens when you try to run things using task forces. Believe me, we have been through this in Malaysia. Okay? So we locked them up in a room for 6 weeks until they detail everything out. But the return on investment is this. After 6 weeks, you are now just focused on implementation. Okay? You don't have to think about things anymore because the 3-foot plan that is created in the lab contains every detail, every action required to be taken by every department, at what budget, at what time frame, with which targets, etc., etc. Okay? And in the process of our labs, we also do the syndication with the finance ministries and so on and so forth to make sure that the budgets are properly ring-fenced for these projects. So we do this so that nobody has any excuse for failing to deliver after that. Okay? As a result of this, just give you one example. When we did the Economic Transformation Program Labs in 2010, by engaging the private sector in our process. We actually found that the 92% of the more than 400 billion capital investment required to run the identified projects were being committed by the private sector itself. As merely by engaging the private sector and giving them an opportunity to listen and talk back to the government. Okay, what we found in Malaysia is that there was no shortage of liquidity. There was plenty of cash in Malaysia among our private investors. The reason they were not investing in Malaysia was because they were not clear on what the government priorities were going to be. And you guys know this, all right? Governments change their minds very often. And for an investor, that is a no-no, right? So once we made the strategic direction very clear and we publicly declared the strategic direction, okay, the private investment started flowing because people then now had confidence that this was an area that was safe for them to make their investments. Let me show you data later to prove that, all right? Number 3, after we completed the labs, we convened an open day. Okay? This is something that has never been done in Malaysia before. Okay? Where the government would actually rent a big convention center, okay, and we have a public exhibition. That is a photo from the actual open day for the Economic Transformation Lab in 2010. Fully 13,000 people showed up after we advertised in the newspapers and on radio and on TV, asking people to come and critique the plans from the labs. Okay? Now, why did we do this? We did this to avoid the parliamentary debate. Right? Because when you engage the representatives of the people in parliament, okay, it doesn't matter whether you have full consensus on whether a proposal makes sense. Because as long as the other guy sits on the other side of the hall, he is duty bound to debate and oppose your proposal. Right? So in Malaysia, for the strategic programs, we convene open days where the MPs join the people of Malaysia, okay, to come and comment and feedback on the quality of the proposals and so on and so forth. Okay? Once the feedback from the public is gathered, then we published a book. So this book for our ETP, for example, 601 pages long, okay, with all the detailed plans of the 131 strategic projects that were identified by the 500 members of the labs, with gory details about goals, timelines, accountabilities, budgets, etc., etc. Now, this book almost caused a rebellion in the Malaysian cabinet. Okay? When Pemandu proposed to publish this book, almost every member of the cabinet opposed it because they did not want the plans to be out in public. What if we fail? What if my ministry doesn't deliver this particular initiative? The people know. Our prime minister was the one person who overrode the entire cabinet and said, I want to publish this because then we have no choice. This is what Ali was trying to say about becoming pregnant. The moment we published the book, we all collectively became pregnant because the details were not available to the public. And remember, you actually consulted members of the public on the plans before. Okay? So now our ministers are on the hook for delivering. So that follows to the next step. There's the KPIs. So again, I heard several mentions of KPIs this morning about how KPIs would be the silver bullet that will solve everybody's problems, and so on and so forth. But the fact is that KPIs can be gamed. People can manipulate KPIs. So in Malaysia, we don't allow our ministers to determine their own KPIs. The KPIs are actually translated directly from the recommendations of the lab. Whatever the lab produced becomes the KPI for the minister. Okay? So it was the members of the lab, the implementing community that you asked to help you with your objective. They are the ones who are now saying this ministry needs to build so many kilometers of roads. This ministry needs to approve the building permit for this hotel. This ministry needs to complete this industrial zone by such and such a date, etc., etc., etc. Okay? The only thing that we allow the ministers to do with regards to their KPIs is to negotiate the annual targets with us. Okay? So you cannot run away from the actual KPI, but we will be reasonable and negotiate the targets for the year. All right? Remember, this is a 10-year program, so you can take your time. As long as you meet the objective in the next 10 years, we actually can negotiate on the annual rate. Okay, that's okay. All right? Now, but putting KPIs on the ministers without providing them problem-solving support is actually quite unfair. All right? So, the poor minister, and now the civil servants come into the picture. All right? You have given the minister a KPI, which means the minister is going to be sending all that shit downstream now. All right? Sorry, pardon my language, but I needed to to emphasize this point. No minister is going to keep the burden solely on his shoulders. He's going to pass it on to his Director General. The Director General is going to pass it on to his assistant directors, and so on and so forth. Okay? So here is when the civil servants will need help from the central government, okay, to solve problems for them. What we found in Malaysia is that when we assign KPIs to a particular ministry for a project that was 100% within the purview of that ministry, they delivered very well. I tell you, civil servants do their job well when you give them clear instructions and they can manage the resources. But when a program requires cooperation across multiple ministries, then that's when things start to fall. Okay? Which is why Pemandu is actually housed in the office of the Prime Minister. Not the Minister of Planning, not the Minister of Finance. We actually work at the level of the Prime Minister because only our Prime Minister has the power to reallocate resources across ministries. Only my Prime Minister can tell Minister B to help Minister A. I, as an individual minister, cannot demand support from a brother minister. It's just out of the question. No, you cannot cross other people's territory. Okay? So this kind of problem-solving support is not trivial. Okay? It needs to be the system needs to be quite robust, and the resources need to be put in place. In Malaysia, our ministers have two things that are maybe quite unique, and certainly when I shared it with my colleagues in Egypt, they were excited about it. Every minister in the cabinet has an iPad, and on that iPad, we load an app that we created, which is basically the KPI dashboard. And the data on that dashboard is updated and pushed to the app every Friday at 5 p.m. without fail. Data on the iPad is viewable by every member of cabinet, and every member of the cabinet has the ability to comment and ask questions on each other's performance. Okay? So this allows my Prime Minister to actually monitor the performance of his ministers even if he's traveling around the world. Okay? As long as he carries his iPad and he has access to the internet, 5 p.m. Friday Malaysia time, you'll see the progress update for the week. Now, we do this because we know civil servant behavior. No civil servant will ask for help unless you force him to. Any request for assistance is basically an admission of failure. Their egos will not allow them to ask for help until it's too late. So this dashboard is crucial because by knowing whether they have met the weekly progress expectations, we know that somebody needs help, or if they don't, without them even telling us about it. Okay, so if we see somebody falling behind on their progress indicators, we immediately activate our process and try to find out what's going on. Okay. The second thing that we do in Malaysia is my Prime Minister provides a report card to each of his ministers every 6 months. Okay, and there are consequences to this one. I won't tell you what happened in the Malaysian cabinet when some ministers failed to deliver, but there are consequences to this one. So every 6 months he provides a report card with a grade that tells the ministers what he likes about what they're doing, what he doesn't like about what they're doing, and what he would like them to do next. Okay? And at the end of the year, every minister shares his KPI performance with every other cabinet minister in the cabinet in a public forum, not public, but in a gallery like this. You can see in the bottom picture, this is the actual photo from the cabinet retreat, where we have one minister explaining to his colleagues how he did for the previous year, you know, whether he exceeded his targets, whether he was short of the target, so that they all contribute to each other's, they can help each other with their performance. Okay? Now, the last one is, I think based on the discussions I've heard today, actually quite important here in Egypt. At the end of the year, we commission an audit on the results that the ministers are feeding back to us. Okay? And in Malaysia, even though we have our own government auditors, we actually commission a private third-party independent auditor. And for the last 4 years, we have been using Pricewaterhouse to actually go and verify the results that the ministers have been providing. Now, this one is, it's a lot of money to be spent. This Pricewaterhouse is not cheap. Okay, but the return on investment is actually in the confidence that you inspire, not in your domestic stakeholder base, but in the foreign stakeholder base. Okay? A country like ours, Malaysia and Egypt, we are still hungry for foreign direct investment. Investors outside never trust your government audit reports. Okay? Investment bankers, financial analysts, and so on and so forth, they're always looking for ways that they can increase the quality of the reports that they produce for their clients. So if you can give them credible data signed off by an independent auditor, okay, it helps greatly with the kinds of ratings that they give your country. All right? I will show you, again, clear examples of how this has helped us in Malaysia. In addition to the audit, we also assemble an annual panel of international experts to come and review the audited results. So this is kind of like your board of directors review. Okay? They come and review our audited results to tell us whether they think our program is still relevant from a global perspective. Okay? If we picked one sector to focus on that has changed around the world, maybe we don't know about it, etc., etc. So we spend money on our international panel to provide us advice. The last thing we do at the end of the year is to produce then the annual report. This is then how we close the loop with the people of Malaysia. Okay? The annual report is actually a public document. Right? So all the results, and you can see over there, there's an actual page from the annual report which shows the KPI for a particular minister, how many % did he achieve of his target, whether it's green, whether it has a yellow flag, or if it's red. Okay, this is published to the public, right? So the good, the bad, the ugly, everything is shared with the public because we want the public to know that we have actually taken heed of their feedback, and we are trying to deliver on what they gave us the mandate to deliver. All right, and this is to seek their approval to continue doing this. All right, so these are the 8 steps of the Big Fast Results methodology that we use to drive our national transformation program. So if you don't believe the impact, let me show you some of the real indicators. Now, so I showed you just now, gross national income has increased almost 50% since in the 5 years since we started this program. All right, I cannot tell you that there is a direct correlation between our work and the rise in the income levels, but we leave that to everybody to analyze. Okay, this I showed you this slide earlier. This is the income generated by the identified priority areas, just to underscore the importance of narrowing your focus and investing only in the key priority sectors, not every sector in the country. This is data from the Malaysian Investment Development Authority. You can see very clearly from here the amount of approved investments in the pipeline has been breaking records every year, okay, in Malaysia. Despite what everybody is saying about the state of the economy and the situation facing Southeast Asia, etc., Malaysia has been increasing the rate of investments in the country since 2010. Here's another cut of the data, right? So before we started our transformation program, private investment was growing at a compounded annual growth rate of 5.5%. Since we started our program, that growth rate increased to 13.6%. So you make of this what you can. I'm not telling you that we were 100% responsible for this change in the direction, but you can make your own conclusions. This one is actually one of the more significant ones as well. This data actually shows you that the ratio of private investment to public investment in Malaysia has been steadily growing ever since we started engaging the private sector to let them know what the government priorities are. Okay, in 2010 when we launched the ETP, the ratio of private to public investment was 55 to 45. By the beginning of this year, first half of this year, that ratio had increased to 70-30. Okay, so huge change in the confidence of the private investment community in Malaysia. All right, in terms of jobs, we promised in the economic transformation program that we would create 3.3 million new jobs in our country by the year 2020. As of 2014, the Department of Statistics had already captured 1.8 million new jobs in our country, and 1.5 of that 1.8 million was in the 12 priority sectors only. All right. So again, this slide to underscore the importance of identifying a clear priority and sticking to it. Because once investors know that you have that you are clearly prioritizing a particular sector, the investments will come in, and with investments, jobs will be created, and with jobs being created, incomes will rise. Okay, and that's how we are driving the GNI target in Malaysia today. Okay, so these are just all other slides that I provided for. This was a slide that we review with the investment bankers every 6 months, but I just included it for the heck of it. All right. So Our work in Pemandu has been validated multiple times by various academic institutions. So Harvard Business School has written a paper about us, Princeton has written a paper about us, the World Bank has written a paper. Bloomberg identified my CEO as one of the top 50 most influential people in the world. And Nesta and the Bloomberg Philanthropies identified Pemandu as one of the top 20 government innovation agencies in the world as well, back in 2014. This one is a recent Fortune magazine listing of which are the lucky 7 that will now take over from after the collapse of the BRICS. And Malaysia is the only Southeast Asian country included in that list of 7 countries. So I'm here speaking to you now in Egypt, and I'm actually making an offer to you to share our expertise. If you feel that this could be useful to your efforts here in Egypt. Since 2012, we have been working in Tanzania. At the moment, I actually have 24 Malaysians seconded into the office of the President of Tanzania, helping them to establish their systems. We have done 3 different initiatives in India already with various state governments. And we've been working with President Zuma in South Africa since July of 2014 on his Operation Pakisa, where we are working on marine transport, offshore oil and gas, aquaculture, and marine governance. Okay. So the methodology that I described to all of you is clearly portable between different contexts. So even though we started this work in Malaysia, when we transported the team together with the process into Tanzania, we quickly found that after 1 year, okay, we were able to achieve exactly the same results by using the same sequence of 8 steps, making the cabinet clearly identify their priorities and making the budget priorities accordingly. Okay, convening labs so that experts can define the details of the program. Okay, getting the public engaged so that they can put their support behind the government to make things happen. Okay, and then putting in the KPIs and the problem-solving mechanism to help the ministers and the civil servants deliver. And you can see here, in 1 year. In Tanzania, we managed to connect 2.8 million people to access to water. This was a huge political win for the president. 1.5 million people were given access to electricity. We did a ranking so finally we know the quality of all the schools in Tanzania. We successfully got the port of Dar es Salaam to start operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We did some work in agriculture with smallholders, farmers, and irrigation schemes. And we managed to reduce the deficit of the government budget by 9 trillion shillings, 5.4 billion. Okay, just by focusing on their priorities and executing some new resource mobilization initiatives. Okay? So what I want to share with you as a final conclusion is that transformation, ladies and gentlemen, is not about systems, it's not about tools, it's not, there's any variety of software that you can buy out there. There are a whole host of consultants that you can engage to help you do studies, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, it boils down to actually getting your implementers to start doing things. All right? We don't debate too much. All right? Your Egyptian vision is already set. The targets for 2030 are already there. You don't need to spend any more time trying to refine the details of the vision. It's now time for you to actually get people in the room and say, tell me how exactly you think we're going to do it. Tell me who do you think needs to do what. Tell me what kind of budget he requires to do this. If you tell me all these things, then me as the government, I commit to you these resources, then you have no longer any excuse not to deliver. The exchange, the quid pro quo is as simple as that, right? So in Malaysia, our methodology is not about creating new stuff. We let leadership do its work. The Prime Minister and his cabinet have their salaries. They should be telling us what to do. Our job is to take that vision and translate it down to actionable items. And this is what ensures that the civil servants then now have quality instructions that they can deliver, right? Unless you do all these things, you have multiple loopholes that people can keep swimming through. And that will always be an infinite loop of making excuses, and you will never get anywhere. All right? But this is all good for us talking, let me tell you this, but unless your president and his prime minister and the cabinet truly have consensus about where the budgets go and so on and so forth, it will be tough, right? I don't want to give you any false hopes. In Malaysia, this is successful solely because my prime minister has made this his personal objective. All right, and he is deploying his personal charisma and all his resources, okay, to get things done, right? But we don't entertain too much debate in Malaysia anymore because we don't have time. All right, because this is all about getting the big, fast results. All right. So don't worry about restructuring the ministries. Don't worry about business process re-engineering. Never start a discussion saying, I want to reorganize the department or whatever. This is all window dressing. All right? Whenever you start a discussion focused on the structural issues, the civil service defenses will rise. Everybody will start protecting their own jobs, all right? And the discussion never takes place. So in Malaysia, we steer clear from talking about structural matters. We say, okay, what is the challenge? What needs to be done? And the moment you identify a change and innovation in a certain piece of work, and that piece of work actually gets implemented, you have actually transformed the organization. You have changed a process, and the organization is transformed by default. Okay? So that's my parting advice. All right? I wish you all the best of luck. Thanks for inviting me. It's been great to meet all you guys. Right.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris, for this very insightful presentation. We'll open the floor for 2 to 3 questions, if anybody has a question. Okay, we'll take one from here. Okay, which one? We'll take the lady first. Raj. And then, okay, this one, and this one, and then this one, and then we'll okay, and then this one. And then
Hi.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the presentation and for giving us motivation. We feel that after your presentation that there is still hope that we can change things in Egypt.
There's always hope.
Yes. My question would be about the implementation step. So you need caliber in the government to actually implement such strategies. So if you don't have this caliber and you're not able to re-employ and get rid of the old caliber, how do you get over that issue?
Actually, you need high caliber people to facilitate the process. Okay, this is the essence of delivery units. Delivery units are like catalysts to any particular process. Your civil service, I think, is larger than our civil service in Malaysia. We have 1.2 million people on the payroll in our civil service right now. There's plenty of people to do work. It's impossible to have them, to send them off for training courses and to and to increase their caliber, so to speak. It will never happen. But they are on the ground, they are ready to work. Okay? So the caliber that you require in your government actually is in the facilitation of the process. All right? You need people to guide the discussion. The experts are there. Okay? Let me tell you, I give you a really good story about what happened in our crime lab. We ran a lab to minimize, to see how we can identify ways to minimize crime in Malaysia. When we had 40 people from the police, from the military, from NGOs, etc., sitting in the room, and one of them came up with a brilliant idea. He was actually a senior police officer. All right? He said, actually, sir, I've been to New York. I actually visited the New York Police Department. And they have this great way of doing high-profile policing. This is something I don't need to go into explaining all the details, but the story is this. He said, so the New York Police Department have this thing called high-profile policing. It's very, very effective. We got him in front of the Prime Minister to explain his concept, all right, to the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister said, why aren't we doing it? So the PM turns over to the Inspector General of Police and says, why aren't we doing this? And the Inspector General says, of course, sir, we will do it. The point is this, and they did it, and the results were phenomenal. Come to Malaysia, I'll show you how it works. The point of the story is this. We had a senior police officer in the police department who had been entertaining this idea for years. He had been trying to convince his bosses to do it. But of course, bosses being bosses, egos will not allow you to represent the views of a subordinate as your own. So the idea got killed. What happened in the lab was we facilitated the discussion and we brought this guy in front of the Prime Minister and gave him a platform to speak. And he got his idea in front of the Prime Minister directly. And the Inspector General of the police who's sitting next to the Prime Minister says, yes, sir, we will do it. Okay? It's as easy as that. So you don't need to change the police force. You need to enable people to talk to each other. You need to enable ideas to percolate upwards so that it gets to the decision makers. All right, it bypass all the politics of the civil service and so on and so forth. So this is the quality of the people that you require in this country. And you don't need a whole lot of them. In my organization, Pemandu, is 150 people. And we manage the program, the government transformation program, the economic transformation program, the strategic reform program, that's 24 different programs with 150 people on behalf of the Prime Minister. That's all you need. And Pemandu, I do have to say, 70% of us were recruited from the private sector. 30% were seconded from the civil service to come and join us, right? So you do need people with that drive and that determination that they learn from working in the private sector to come and help the process. But once the reaction is already triggered, you can move off. All right, all catalysts will die after the reaction. All right, and so we do that. So don't worry about having to recruit large amounts of people and having to train your entire civil service. You don't need to do that. You need to enable a clear chain of command, a clear channel for communication, and to make sure that resources are properly aligned with what you say you want to do. Once all those pieces are in place, there's no reason why it shouldn't go. All right? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we'll go for so Chris was, he worked for 20 years at Intel, and he was the country manager in Malaysia before moving to the government 8 years ago. We'll take the second question, and then we'll move ahead with the rest. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, Mohammed, I happen to work also with the team who worked on the Egypt 2030 vision. And for me, it's very, very inspiring what he told us. And as I said, you give us hope that this could happen. I have just a couple of questions. The first one is that do you go into detailing of the budgets for all the projects that you work on, or you just you do high-level budgeting exercises? The first one. The second is, how is the whole program governed? It's mainly by the Prime Minister. So what if the Prime Minister, we have him changing every 6 months? So, okay.
Yeah, the budget is as detailed as you can get. Okay, so so to answer your question simply, yes, you have to do a detailed budget analysis, and you need to time your analysis in lockstep with your annual budget cycle, right? So if you miss the budget submission, then you're waiting for next year's annual budget. So the timing of it is also very key. Now, the reason for making sure you do it at the most granular level possible is twofold. It's to make the implementing person accountable for the outcome. You said you needed $1 million. I'm giving you $1 million. Okay, and you tell me exactly how you're going to spend it, so I can monitor you. All right. By the lab, it will be discussed in the lab, all right? But then at specific points in the 6 weeks, we bring in the finance ministry to come and review and say, oh, by the way, our discussions so far are like this, and it looks like we will need this amount of money. Can you make sure you set it aside, all right? And then at the end of the process, we will get the Prime Minister to sign it off, right? So yes, you must do your detailed budget analysis, okay? Second reason why you must do the detailed budget analysis, because you are potentially taking resources away from somebody else who's also looking for resources. So you better do your job damn well, because there are 100 people waiting to see you fail, okay? Because you have suddenly, because of this process, become the president's pet project. All right, and you are taking money away from somebody else, right? So the others who lost out on the priority race will be eager to see you fail. So do your job well. As far as governance is concerned, every single one of the national key economic areas or the national key results areas, the initiatives, is under the sponsorship of one particular cabinet minister. So every cabinet minister, I showed you the 12 areas just now. So the Minister of Finance obviously takes charge of the financial services industry, tourism, electronics and electrical is under Ministry of International Trade and Industry, and so on and so forth. The KPIs are assigned to that minister. He convenes a monthly steering committee where the project leaders come and talk about progress and report issues and so on and so forth. Now, the minister responsible will try to resolve the issue within the steering committee. But remember, he's in charge of only one ministry. He cannot command resources from other ministries. So if there are problems that cross boundaries, then we escalate it to another forum called the Problem Solving Meeting. A very creative name, PSM. The problem-solving meeting is chaired personally by our Prime Minister. Okay? Now, this one is, our PM calls it the Putrajaya Inquisition. If you guys remember your medieval history, what happened during the Spanish Inquisition, right? It's a very torturous process. The Prime Minister sits with the Chief Secretary of the Treasury on one side and the Chief Secretary of the government on the other side. And he faces the minister and the minister's Director General and the Pemandu Director in charge of that particular sector. We force the minister to actually summarize, to distill the problem into such detail until he can say clearly to the Prime Minister, I cannot move because this ministry has failed to do this, or we are failing to do this because we lack budget, or so on and so forth. The Prime Minister makes an immediate decision. If it's a budget issue, he makes an immediate call, and the the Secretary of the Treasury is there to take action on it. If it's a human resource issue, he makes a decision, and the Chief Secretary of the Cabinet it takes action on it immediately. So we convene this problem-solving meeting every 6 months. But let me tell you one thing about this very strange Putrajaya Inquisition. We give notice to the individual ministers and the director generals that they have to come and attend this meeting with the Prime Minister. We give them 4 weeks notice, and we start working with them to prepare the details. So remember, I said we have to get the problem solved, the problem statement distilled until it's so clear to make one decision required from the Prime Minister. By the time we announce the agenda for the meeting and the time the meeting is actually called, I think 70 to 80% of the problems disappear. Miraculously, they find a way to solve the problem because they don't want to face the Prime Minister. So the ones who actually go in front of the PM are ones that are really, really big problems. Maybe somebody needs the Attorney General to amend the law. Maybe, somebody really has run out of budget. Maybe somebody doesn't, you have some big issues. Then those ones come to. So that's our governance, right? Okay.
Okay, so we'll move to we'll take a question from this side. Okay. Yes, please. Yeah, so she should go in there. So Chris was telling me yesterday they asked the ministers to put on the iPads all the details, and they are announced on Friday at 5 p.m. Okay, and every minister has the right to comment on them. Why on 5 p.m.? To spoil their weekend. So that was the message.
Yeah.
So
we do it on 5 p.m. so they are thinking about it on the weekend so that on Monday they start working. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Thank you, first of all. Thank you for your honesty and all your great presentation. I have 2 questions. Okay, first one is about the oversizing of our government. You heard we have over 6 million civil servants. Is there a maximum size for a successful government, or it's okay, any size can fit and work and no problem with that? That's the first question. Should I say answer or tell you the second question?
Yeah, so let me answer the question first. Actually, I will answer it from a different perspective. Yeah. There is a certain size, an optimum size of your program. Okay, you should limit your program size to the highest priorities. Okay, like take for example our economic transformation one. We decided clearly we can only focus on 12 out of almost 50. Okay, but this doesn't have any bearing on the size of the government itself. We're talking about focusing your priorities, narrowing your focus so that you can actually give proper attention to those areas. And I mentioned just now the Pareto principle. Yeah, and I showed you data that actually bears this out. The Pareto principle applies even in this case. The top 20% of your initiatives will give you 80% of the impact. Okay? So try to resist the temptation to boil the ocean. All right? Focus on those highest priorities, and then you will get the majority of your impact from there. And of course, to identify which priorities you should focus on, you need good quality data, right? And here's where, back to the question about caliber of staff, you need good people for this one, okay? You need the good statisticians, you need the researchers, and so on and so forth, so that you can actually make credible recommendations on what you should focus on. But apart from that, the size of the civil service has no bearing on the issue. We are talking about identifying what should be the scope of your program. So far, your Vision 2030 is 12 core areas. That's fine. We have 12. You have 12 is perfect. I don't think you need to change it.
The second question is about the parliament. You mentioned that at the beginning of the lab, you made an open day so that the parliament doesn't negotiate very much and stop every step you're doing. Don't you have any problems that now? Because actually I'm a candidate for the parliament, so that's why I'm asking. How can the parliament help and not being a problem of the problem?
How can the department head
The
not be?
parliament.
Oh, let me tell you, Parliament still needs to pass the budget.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no way you can escape Parliament when it comes to these things. So they still need to give you the money. But you don't need to go into the details of the projects with them. Okay? But let me turn that around. It's preferable to go through the details with as many people as you can. All right, so that you get the popular support for what you want to do. And if you limit this to a parliamentary session, then only only a select crowd of people will actually see the details. You know what I mean? All right, and that when so few people understand the details, this allows the implementers a lot of wriggle room later. Okay, they can say, okay, this is not what we agreed. This is not what we actually said, etc., etc. So we do the open day to make sure the public knows what the government is planning to do, so that they will hold the government accountable for bringing for delivering the thing. So you are not taking Parliament's role away at all. All right, Parliament still needs to vote to approve the budget and so on and so forth, all right? But you want the public to get behind you, right? So that in case you have a leadership change, for example, all right, the public will still remember what the previous leader promised to do. Right?
I mean, you don't have any problems with the legislation system. You don't change rules. What's the role of the parliament, your parliament? What are you doing with it?
None.
Because you're only talking about the government and the prime minister, which is very good, but what does the other side
No,
do?
Parliament doesn't get into the job of implementation. If Parliament is trying to implement, we have a problem. All right, implementation is always with the ministry and the executive side. Okay, Parliament is only for legislation, right?
You don't have an
excuse me.
controlling thing about it.
You have you have subcommittees that try to give oversight and all that. Yes, we do. All right, so you do have financial subcommittees and so on and so forth. They will do their job, but this is oversight, not implementation. Okay, be very clear about this one. Implementation, once you are given the mandate, you should just do it. I mean, that's what I believe in Malaysia. You don't get into all this debate in politics.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Thank you. So we'll take the last two questions, one here and then one here, and then we'll close. So can you give the mic?
First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. It was really inspiring. I just have a question related to the change management. You mentioned that the bureaucrats were out in the beginning, right? So what happens to the other disablers or people who are resisting to change? If you have most of your third line and your civil servants, half of them, for example, have been there for like decades and many years. How did you deal with resistance, and how far did you go to get them on board? That's my question.
Okay, so I think my choice of words is hyperbole, by the way, had the right effect, got your attention. When I say we keep the bureaucrats out, I mean the non-value-added bureaucrats. Okay, There are some bureaucrats who are in charge of implementing things. There are some who are at the operational level who know exactly what needs to be done. Okay, those are the people we bring into our labs. Okay, the resistance to ideas is inevitable. Okay, that's why our labs takes at least 6 weeks. Ideally, we take 8. All right, because the first week of the lab is going to be spent on what we call scope crisis. Everybody will have their own idea of how to achieve this particular objective. Now, we all remember that old poem about the 7 blind men trying to describe the elephant, right? Okay. Everyone will have their own idea based on what part of the elephant they are touching. Okay, so you will spend a great deal of time debating. Okay, but it's better to have the debate early than once you've already started the initiative. We have examples of when we did the work in India, in Maharashtra, where we were trying to solve the issue of water irrigation for the state of Maharashtra. We had drainage engineers, we had meteorologists, we had agricultural experts, all of them meeting for the first time in the lab. So these guys have been trying to solve the problems of irrigation from their own perspective. So the engineers were having an engineering solution, the academics were trying to research their way out of it, the agriculture experts were trying to find new planting methods and so on and so forth. But they never actually talked to each other until we brought them into the lab. All right? So they spent about a week arguing which one is better. The engineer says his way is better, the planter says his way is better, etc., etc. Eventually, they will reach consensus. Okay? And here is why I say facilitation is important. Okay? You need quality facilitation. This is what Pemandu provides to our clients. Our guys are there to actually coordinate the discussions and to draw out the proper directions and to force the process to reach some kind of resolution at a certain time of the week. All right. But change management, you have to go through. And the best way to do change management is to engage people in the actual definition of the solution, right? And that's why you do this in the lab. Yeah. So we don't discount resistance. You expect resistance, but you have to bring people together and help them to reach consensus.
Okay, we take the last question from here, and then we'll move to the last session of the day.
Thank you for your presentation and insights. I just have a question in your vision of 2020. You mentioned the creation of 3.3 million jobs, of which you've already achieved almost 50% of that. I'm curious about the interventions you're making to ensure the preparation of human capital for those kinds of jobs. Thank you.
Very, very good. This is why you need a lab. Okay. So, real example of this one. We had 12 labs running concurrently. Oil and gas, palm oil and rubber, retail and wholesale, electronics, electrical, financial services, etc., etc. I think around week 2. So let me break down the lab process for you, how we spend the 6 weeks. First week is on what we call solutioning, setting the ambitions. Okay? So we agree on the problem statement and we try to agree on what we call the true north. Okay? What is that one guiding KPI, that goal that we will all focus our energies towards? Second week, we start doing what we call solutioning. We start throwing out wild ideas. How can we achieve this objective? And by the time you finish the end of the week, you have slowly funneled your way through a bunch of solutions, and then you have a short list. Okay? At this point in time, we bring the minister into the process, and we spend an hour with the minister, and we say, okay, minister, this is our idea, the direction that we are going. Do you agree, yes or no? Okay? If the minister now gives us the go-ahead, we proceed to the next step, which is then to look at the budgets. Okay? how do we get the budgets for this one? All right. Once we proceed, after we secure the budgets, after talking to the Ministry of Finance, okay, in week 3, then we go and look at the governance. Okay, who's going to be responsible for each of these items? Which is what platform do we use for reporting and so on and so forth. Then we do another review with the Prime Minister and say, okay, sir, these are the proposed solutions, these are the targets we hope to meet, this is the budgets that's required, these are the people that are going to be held accountable, do you agree, yes or no? The moment the Prime Minister says yes, then we're off and running. So this is how you spend the 5 weeks. So back to your question, in week 2, when we did the economic transformation program, we would try to look at the solutions. We asked every lab to come up with their estimate. How many people of what qualification, okay, will you require for each of these projects? And bear in mind, these were private companies that were making their proposals, so they knew exactly what their plans were. Then we consolidated all of this. That data was then sent to the Ministry of Education, all right, and was baked into the education blueprint. So it's important for us to do this early. Right? The target is 2020, but you need to have the discussion now because it takes so many years for the curriculum to be designed. It takes so many years for people to come out of the pipeline, right? So we do actually have 3 different education initiatives under our watch. We have what we call the Human Capital Development Strategic Reforms. This one is where we look at how to rebalance between academic education, vocational education, primary, secondary, elementary, so on and so forth. Then we have the Education NKRA, which looks at the quality of the curriculum and teaching methods, teaching resources, etc., etc. And then we have a third one called the Education NKEA, which looks at how the private education sector can come in to supplement the government's resources. Right? So we try to cover all bases. But yeah, you do have to make sure the human capital requirements are identified very early on. Yeah. Okay. It's part of our process. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So Chris will be here tomorrow for another session at 11 a.m. in Hall 2. Talking about how Malaysia at the moment is working on bringing 100 of the most dynamic firms to have their regional headquarters in Malaysia or in Kuala Lumpur. And the second thing, how are they developing the electrical and electronics sectors and which project in them. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for your time. Thank you. Yes. And we'll go now to the last session.
By the way, just indulge me for a while. I want to make a quick plug for an event. Since everybody is so interested in our work, there is something called the Global Transformation Forum happening in Kuala Lumpur at actually 2 weeks from now. So it's 3,000 people from government, from corporations all over the world coming to talk about their experiences in transforming their companies, transforming their governments and all that. This Pemandu is doing this in partnership with the UNDP. So we have Helen Clark speaking, we have Arnold Schwarzenegger coming to talk about the government of California, we have Sebastian Coe talking about his London 2012 campaign, we have Kiran Bedi talking about how she transformed the Indian penal system, etc., etc. Please look at globaltransformation.com if you want more information about this forum. And it's you're most welcome to join us. Okay?
All right. Thank you.